Who are you? This question is a matter of the highest importance. When Jesus came to earth, he claimed that the entire destiny of every man, woman, and child would depend upon how they viewed him. If his claims are true, the decisions we make about Jesus will determine whether we spend eternity with him or without him. Nothing could be more important. Peter Joseph produced a film entitled Zeitgeist. The film is broken into several parts. The first part, and the only part we will be focusing on, deals with the Christian religion. The film specifically argues that Christianity is mainly derived from other religions, astronomical assertions, astrological myths, and tradition, which in turn were derived or shared elements from other traditions. It continues by arguing that the historical Jesus is a literary and astrological hybrid nurtured politically. The work of D.M. Murdoch, author of The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold, is used extensively in part one of the movie to argue that the concept of Jesus Christ is a myth, and states that the Christ story is a fabrication. She also acted as a consultant for part one of the movie. So now it is time to take a second look at the Zeitgeist movie.
There's another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce. The shortening of the days and the expiration of the crops when approaching the winter solstice symbolize the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again. This is why Jesus and numerous other sun gods share the crucifixion, 3-day death, and resurrection concept. It is the sun's transition period before it shifts its direction back into the northern hemisphere, bringing spring and thus salvation.
Saying the winter solstice occurs around December 25th obviously is implying that somehow the day is special. The winter solstice really occurs December 21st or 22nd, not the 25th. Each day the sun changes position in the sky slightly. It does not stop in the sky for 3 days. Though the filmmaker adds the word perceivably. The reason they use such language is obviously to imply that there is some kind of connection with Jesus. The winter solstice happens for the northern hemisphere, when the Earth reaches the farthest point in the ellipse, technically known as the end of the major axis, from the Sun, with the North Pole tilted away from the Sun. By contrast, the summer solstice occurs at the opposite end of the ellipse, the opposite end of the major axis, when the North Pole is pointing toward the Sun. The initial problem is that the Earth does not follow our calendar. The winter solstice can occur anywhere from December 20th to December 23rd depending on your location. For the sake of simplicity, however, let us say that the Sun always hits its lowest point in the sky, and thus the winter solstice, on December 22nd. The film goes on to say that a curious thing happens, in that the sun perceivably stops moving for 3 days, namely December 22nd, 23rd and 24th. If December 22nd is, when the Earth reaches the end of the major axis of the ellipse that marks the winter solstice, and the continued movement of the Earth along the ellipse is perceivably so small, that the Sun appears to stop moving on the 22nd, 23rd and 24th, then it would also seem to stop moving on December 20th and 21st as well. Therefore, logically the Jesus death-resurrection should have been a 5-day event, not 3. Now the film is starting to be a little tricky with a half-truth. During the time of Jesus there was a southern cross above Bethlehem, but because of a precession, it can no longer be seen in Bethlehem's sky today. We will let the video explain.
6,000 years ago, while standing in the area of Jerusalem, if you were looking to the south, you would have seen the southern sky as it looks in the first few seconds of this video. There is a constellation called the Southern Cross that was clearly visible at that time. The Earth experiences a wobble that is called precession, which causes the stars in the sky to shift over time. This video compresses about 6,500 years of precession into just about 1 minute. About 2/3 of the way through this video marks the birth of Jesus Christ in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is just south and slightly to the west of Jerusalem, precisely where the Southern Cross is and had been descending for the previous 4,000 years. The remainder of this video shows the cross setting on the horizon until it is completely gone by around the year 2400 AD. God is truly amazing. See 2 Peter, verse 3-8.
The film makes it sound like the Southern Cross is still there, but in reality it has not been there since 240 AD, and was eventually forgotten by the inhabitants of northern latitudes. The constellation of the Southern Cross is not visible north of about latitude north 30 degrees. It is too far south of the Sun for the Southern Cross to be seen above Bethlehem again in the northern hemisphere. Essentially our planet would have to either turn nearly on its side, or fall more than 40 degrees out of orbit in order for the Sun to ever reside in the vicinity of the Southern Cross. There is no connection in the New Testament of either the death or the resurrection of Jesus with the winter solstice or what happens then. The death and resurrection of Jesus was on Easter Passover, nowhere near the winter solstice. The story of Jesus' birth, death and resurrection are not told in light of such thinking about the winter solstice at all. As for the other gods listed before, same applies there. And the 3 days. It is also impossible that the Southern Cross could be involved, considering the Southern Cross can only be seen in the southern hemisphere, and Bethlehem is in the northern hemisphere. The filmmaker goes on to attempt to draw connections between death of the Son, a crucifixion, being dead 3 days, and coming back to life. The problem, again, none of the other gods aside from Jesus were crucified. This could be an attempt to make a connection between Jesus, the crucifixion, and the other gods, however this attempt does not work because of what was already shown. The reason the cross represents Christianity and by extension Jesus, has little to do with the Sun residing in the vicinity of the Southern Cross and more to do with the fact Jesus was crucified by Romans on a cross. The evidence shows there is no connection between Jesus, Sun gods, the crucifixions, 3-day deaths, and resurrections.
Oh, damn it.